The twin suns of Aurelia stretched their last rays across the frontier mining colony, painting the twilight sky in shades of deep violet and amber. On the rocky plateau, where the colony had established its outpost, Jackson Hale stood at the edge, gazing out at the vast desert canyons that stretched toward the horizon. The wind carried the scent of mineral dust and the promise of an approaching night chill. 3 standard months into his assignment as security advisor to this remote outpost, and Jackson still felt like an outsider. Not that he minded detachment was a professional asset in his line of work. As an exoplanetary diplomat turned security specialist, he had made a career of keeping emotional distance. It made the hard choices easier. He checked his chronometer. The Arinthian delegation would arrive for the dusk ceremony in less than an hour, and Princess Tale's security detail would expect a full briefing. Jackson had studied the cultural briefings thoroughly. The nomadic Arinthian clan was known for their fierce warriors and arcane social rituals that had remained largely untested by outsiders. That's what made this mission so delicate. The frontier colony needed the trade routes the Arinthians controlled, and the Arinthians needed the mining technology the colony could provide. And Princess Tale, as the fiercest warrior of her clan, and next in line to lead, had been sent to forge this alliance. "Mr. Hale," a voice called from behind him. One of the junior security officers approached with a data tablet. "The advanced scout reports that the Arinthian caravan has been spotted. Princess Tale rides at the front." Jackson nodded, taking the tablet and scanning the security protocols one final time. "Make sure everyone understands no sudden movements during the ceremony. The Arinthians interpret physical gestures differently than we do. One wrong move could be seen as an insult, or worse." "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "The colony administrator asked me to remind you that this alliance is critical to our survival out here." "As if I could forget," Jackson muttered more to himself than to the officer. He handed back the tablet. "I'll meet them at the designated arrival point." The procession of the Arinthian clan was visible long before they reached the colony's gates. Their vehicles, a mixture of advanced hover technology and traditional animal-drawn caravans, kicked up dust trails that caught the last golden light of the setting suns. Flags of vibrant crimson and deep indigo, adorned with glittering metallic threads, fluttered in the desert wind. At the head of the procession rode Princess Tale. Even from a distance, Jackson could see why her reputation preceded her. She sat astride a massive 6-legged mount, whose scaled hide shimmered iridescent in the fading light. Her posture was regal spine, straight as a blade, her face partially concealed by a ceremonial half-mask of polished metal and precious stones. Her long hair braided with silver threads, and tiny crystal beads whipped in the wind like a banner of war. Jackson stepped forward as the colony's designated representative, flanked by the settlement's leaders. He had been chosen for this role precisely because of his diplomatic background, and because he had no family ties or emotional entanglements that might complicate negotiations. "Welcome to Outpost Meridian," he called out, using the formal greeting he had rehearsed in the Arinthian tongue. His translator drone hovered nearby, ready to assist with the more complex exchanges to come. Princess Tale dismounted in a single fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime of physical training. She removed her ceremonial mask, revealing a face of striking angles, high cheekbones, sharp jawline, and eyes that seemed to shift color, like the planet's auroras. She was younger than Jackson had expected, perhaps no more than 30 standard Earth years. But her expression carried the weight of ancient traditions. "We accept your welcome, Outpost Meridian," she replied, her voice carrying a melodic cadence, even as she spoke the colonial language with surprising fluency. "I am Tale, daughter of the Twin Moons, heir to the Arinthian clan, keeper of the sacred flame." She gestured to the ornate energy pistol at her hip, a ceremonial weapon that was said to harness the same mysterious energy as the planet's core. Jackson bowed his head in acknowledgement. "I am Jackson Hale, appointed guardian of these negotiations. May our discussions prove fruitful under Aurelia's moons." Something flickered in Tale's expression, surprised perhaps that an outsider would know the traditional reference to the planet's twin moons that would soon rise in the darkening sky. "You have studied our ways," she observed, her tone neither approving nor disapproving. "I believe understanding precedes trust," Jackson replied simply. Tail studied him for a long moment before turning to address the colony's leaders. "My people will set camp on the eastern plateau as agreed. Tonight we will observe the rising of the sister ceremony. Tomorrow we begin our talks." The next several hours passed in a flurry of activity as the Arinthian clan established their temporary settlement with remarkable efficiency. Colorful tents and pavilions bloomed like exotic flowers across the plateau. Cooking fires were lit, filling the air with unfamiliar spices. Instruments produced haunting melodies that seemed to harmonize with the wind itself. Jackson observed it all with professional detachment, noting security vulnerabilities, potential friction points between the two cultures, and most importantly, the dynamics within the Arinthian leadership. Princess Tal clearly commanded respect, but he noticed the elders watching her closely, as if measuring her every decision. As the planet's twin moons, one silver one, with a distinct blue tinge, began their ascent into the night sky, the Arinthians gathered in a wide circle at the center of their camp. They had invited key representatives from the colony to join them for this sacred ceremony, and Jackson found himself positioned directly across from Princess Tal in the ring of observers. The ceremony began with chanting low, rhythmic sounds that seemed to vibrate in Jackson's chest. Arinthian elders moved around the circle, anointing each person's forehead with luminescent oil that caught the moonlight. When an elderly woman approached Jackson, he inclined his head respectfully, accepting the ritual touch. "You stand at a crossroads," the old woman whispered so softly that only he could hear. "The path you choose tonight will echo across stars." Before Jackson could ask what she meant, she had moved on to the next person. He glanced across the circle, only to find Princess Tal watching him with an inscrutable expression. The ceremony continued as the moons climbed higher. Arinthian warriors performed a complex dance with energy blades that left trails of light in the darkness. Stories were told in the ancient tongue, with Jackson's translator drone providing whispered context in his ear. He learned of the Arinthian creation myth, where the twin moons were said to be sisters who had sacrificed their mortal forms to guide their people through eternity. As the ceremony reached its apex with both moons directly overhead, Princess Tal stepped into the center of the circle. The firelight caught the facets of crystals sewn into her ceremonial robe, creating a constellation of light around her. "Tonight, we stand between worlds," she announced, her voice carrying across the gathering. "The world of our ancestors and the world of our descendants. The world of tradition and the world of innovation." She looked pointedly at the colonial representatives. "We come seeking alliance, not subjugation. Partnership, not dominance." Murmurs rippled through both the Arinthian clan and the colonial delegation. Jackson sensed tension rising. This was clearly a deviation from the expected diplomatic script. Princess Tal was making her position clear from the outset. She would not be pushed into an unequal arrangement. One of the colony's council members leaned toward Jackson. "This could complicate matters," the man whispered. Marshal Vero was counting on more flexibility from the Arinthians. Jackson had heard enough about Marshal Vero, the colonial lawkeeper, who had effective control over most trade routes in the sector, to understand the implied meaning. Vero wanted this alliance on his terms. As Princess Tal continued to address the gathering, outlining her vision for cooperation between their peoples, Jackson's security training kicked into high alert. Something was wrong. The Arinthian elders were exchanging glances. The warriors had subtly shifted positions around the circle. And then he saw a barely perceptible nod from one of the elders to a warrior standing behind Princess Tal. Without thinking, Jackson stepped into the circle. "Princess Tal!" he called out, interrupting her speech. All eyes turned to him in shock at this breach of protocol. Tal's gaze burned into him. "Explain yourself, Guardian Hale." The formal title she used, Guardian, rather than simply his name, told Jackson that despite her anger at the interruption, she was giving him a chance to speak within the bounds of Arinthian custom. In that moment, Jackson made a calculation. If the Arinthian elders were planning to undermine Tail's leadership position, the entire alliance could collapse. Colonial survival relied on this treaty. And more than that, though he'd never admit it aloud, he admired the princess's stance on equality. What came next wasn't planned. It wasn't even fully rational. Later, Jackson would wonder if the ceremonial oil or the hypnotic chanting had affected his judgment. But in that moment under the twin moons with tensions rising on all sides, he saw only one path forward. "Be my wife," he said, the words ringing out clearly across the stunned silence. The gathering erupted in chaos. Colonial representatives gasped. Arinthian warriors reached for weapons. But it was Princess Tail's reaction that froze the blood in Jackson's veins. Without a word, without even a change in her expression, she drew her ancestral energy pistol and fired directly at his heart. Time seemed to slow. Jackson saw the shimmering crystal round leave the barrel of her weapon not a standard projectile, but something that pulsed with inner light. Acting on pure instinct, his hand shot out. And he caught it. The crystal round hovered an inch above his palm, suspended in an aura of blue-white energy that coursed up his arm like lightning. It didn't burn, but Jackson felt something far more alarming, a sensation of connection, as if invisible threads were weaving between his consciousness and someone else's. Tail's eyes widened in what might have been the first genuine shock he'd seen on her face. "So that's how you say yes," Jackson whispered, the words emerging from some place he didn't recognize within himself. Absolute silence fell over the gathering. The Arinthian elders stared in undisguised amazement. The colonial representatives looked between Jackson and Tail in confusion. Finally, one of the oldest Arinthian elders stepped forward, her weathered face illuminated by the glow of the crystal round, still hovering above Jackson's palm. "The soul binding has begun," she announced, her voice trembling. "What has not happened in 7 generations is upon us now." "What madness is this?" demanded the colony administrator, finding his voice at last. "Hale, explain yourself. The princess just tried to kill you." "No," corrected the Arinthian elder. "She answered his proposal as tradition demands. But he—" She pointed a gnarled finger at Jackson. "He caught the soul round. Only a true bond match could do such a thing." Jackson looked at Tail, whose composed mask had given way to barely contained fury. "I did not consent to this," she hissed, switching to her native tongue, which Jackson's translator struggled to keep up with. "You know nothing of what you've done, outsider." "The ceremony is witnessed," declared another elder. "The bond is acknowledged." "This is absurd," Tail protested, her voice rising. "He is not of our people. He does not know our ways." "Yet he caught the soul round," the first elder insisted. "The ancients are clear on this matter. The bond must be honored, or you forfeit your position as heir." The threat hung in the air. Jackson, still holding the glowing crystal, finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. In attempting to solidify the princess's political position, he had inadvertently triggered some kind of mystical bond that threatened her autonomy, the very thing she had just been defending. "There must be another way," Jackson said, addressing the elders directly. "I meant no disrespect to your traditions." "Intentions matter little in matters of soul binding," the elder replied. "What is done is done." The colonial administrator pulled Jackson aside as the Arinthians fell into heated debate among themselves. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "You've endangered the entire mission." "I saw a threat to the princess," Jackson explained tersely. "I acted to stabilize the situation. By proposing marriage to an alien princess. That's your idea of diplomacy." Before Jackson could respond, a commotion from the Arinthian side of the gathering drew their attention. Princess Tal was approaching her warriors, forming a protective semicircle behind her. "Guardian Hale," she addressed him formally, though her eyes blazed with controlled anger. "We will speak privately, now." The inside of Tail's pavilion was a stark contrast to her warrior persona. Delicate tapestries depicting astronomical phenomena hung from the structure's frame. a collection of ancient books and scrolls, sat beside state-of-the-art holographic displays. The air carried the subtle scent of a spice Jackson couldn't identify, something both sharp and soothing. As soon as they were alone, Tal rounded on him. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she demanded. "Evidently not," Jackson admitted. "But I saw one of your warriors positioning to intervene, and that elder signaled—" "Of course they did," Tal cut him off. "It was a test. My leadership is constantly challenged. That is our way." "Then I apologize for my interference," Jackson said. "But not for my concern. Your speech about equal partnership was putting you at risk with both your clan and my people." Tal's eyes narrowed. "You understand nothing of risk, Guardian. Thanks to your impulsive action, I am now bound to either wed you, an outsider who stumbled into our most sacred ritual, or face exile from my clan." She gestured to the crystal round that now hung in a containment field between them, still pulsing with inner light. "Do you even know what this is?" Jackson shook his head. "I assumed it was some kind of ceremonial projectile." A sound escaped Tal that might have been a laugh if it contained any humor. "This is a soul round, the oldest magic of our people. When an Arinthian proposes union to another, the answer comes not in words, but in action. The proposed fires a soul round imbued with their essence. If the proposer truly seeks union of equals, they will catch it, completing the circuit of energy and beginning the soul bond." "But I'm not Arinthian," Jackson pointed out. "How could I catch it?" "That, Tal," said her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "is the question that has thrown my clan into chaos. No outsider has ever caught a soul round before. Some believe it means you have Arinthian ancestry. Others think the ritual has been corrupted. The elders—" She hesitated. "The elders believe it means our union is destined." "I don't believe in destiny," Jackson said flatly. "Nor do I," Tal replied, surprising him. "But I do believe in honor and duty to my people. And now, thanks to you, those two forces are in direct conflict." Jackson considered their position. "What options do we have?" Tal paced the length of the pavilion. "According to tradition, once a soul round is caught, the bond can only be severed in one of three ways: death of one participant, mutual consent, before a council of elders, or, Jackson prompted when she fell silent, or retrieval of the unbinding stone, an ancient relic said to dissolve any mystical connection." She turned to face him fully. "It's a legend hidden somewhere in the whispering canyons to the south. No one has sought it in generations because no one has needed to break a soul bond." "But you believe it exists?" "My great-grandmother's journals speak of it. She was a keeper of the old knowledge." Tal's expression hardened. "It's our only hope of resolving this without political catastrophe. If I'm exiled, my cousin takes leadership and he favors Marshal Viro's offer of protection in exchange for exclusive mining rights." "Which would effectively make your people vassals of the colony," Jackson concluded. The picture was becoming clearer. "And if we go through with the union, then I maintain my position, but at the cost of appearing to submit to colonial authority through marriage." Tal's fist clenched. "Either way, my people lose their autonomy. Unless we find this unbinding stone," Jackson finished. "How long do we have?" "The soul-binding ceremony must be completed under the next full alignment of the twin moons, 7 days from now." Tal studied him with those color-shifting eyes. "Are you offering to help me find the stone, Guardian?" "I caused this problem," Jackson said simply. "And I believe in your vision of equal partnership between our peoples. So yes, I'll help you find it." For the first time, something like respect flickered across Tal's face. "Then we leave at first light. Tell no one of our destination." The following morning, as the first sun crested the horizon, Jackson met Tal at the eastern edge of the plateau. She had exchanged her ceremonial robes for practical expedition gear, though the soul round now contained in a crystal vial hung at her belt. Her hair was braided tightly against her head, and she carried a pack that Jackson suspected contained far more technology than her people typically displayed. "My scout reports that Marshal Viro arrived at the colony an hour after midnight," she informed him as he approached. He'll be looking for both of us once he discovers we're gone. I left instructions with my second to stall any official inquiries, Jackson replied. He had spent half the night arranging for their absence to be plausibly explained for at least a day. What's our route? Tail activated a holographic map projected from a device on her wrist. We follow the Canyon of Whispers south for 2 days, then turn east at the lightning fields. The temple that supposedly houses the unbinding stone lies beneath the rainbow spires. She pointed to a formation of crystalline mountains on the map. The journey is treacherous. Few venture that far into the Badlands. Why? Jackson asked, adjusting the energy rifle slung across his back. Radiation storms, predatory flora, sand sharks. Tail's expression was grim. And those are just the natural hazards. They set out as the second sun began to rise, descending from the plateau into the vast canyon network that carved through Aurelia's landscape. The rock formations towered above them in shades of rust and amber with veins of mineral deposits, creating patterns like frozen lightning across the surfaces. For the first few hours, they traveled in tense silence. Jackson was acutely aware of Tail's resentment, though he noted she never treated him with disrespect. She was a professional like him, personal feelings subordinate to the mission at hand. Around midday, as they stopped in the shadow of a massive arch of stone, Tail finally broke the silence. You said you saw one of my warriors positioning to intervene last night. How most outsiders can't distinguish the subtle shifts in our stance. Jackson took a drink from his canteen before answering. I've spent time on 17 different planets with humanoid species. Body language has patterns even across cultures. Your warrior shifted weight to their back foot, classic preparation for a forward lunge. Impressive observation, Tail acknowledged, though your response was still reckless. Agreed, Jackson said, surprising her with his candor. I calculated that an unplanned proposal would create confusion and buy time. I did not anticipate magical consequences. The soul round is not magic as your people understand it, Tail corrected. It's concentrated energy drawn from Aurelia's core, shaped by generations of Arinthian consciousness. Science and spirituality unified. Jackson nodded. Like your weapon. He gestured to the energy pistol at her hip. Yes. It's been in my lineage for 12 generations. It draws from the same energy source as the soul rounds. She hesitated, then added, It's said that the weapon knows its wielder's true intent. That's why training to use it requires years of meditation and self-knowledge. Yet you drew and fired in an instant when I proposed, Jackson observed. A ghost of a smile touched Tail's lips. Reaction reveals truth more reliably than contemplation. Before Jackson could respond, a low rumbling sound echoed through the canyon. Tail was on her feet instantly, scanning the walls around them. Dust storm? Jackson asked, also rising. No, Tail's voice was tight. Sand shark, we need to move now. They abandoned their rest and raced deeper into the canyon. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by a sound like millions of grains of sand shifting at once. There, Tail pointed to a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. We can wedge ourselves in until it passes. They had almost reached the crevice when the ground beneath their feet began to ripple. Jackson turned to see a massive shape, like the dorsal fin of ancient earth sharks, but composed entirely of crystalline material, cutting through the solid ground as if it were water. Run! Tail shouted, giving Jackson a hard push toward the fissure. He stumbled forward, but realized instantly that Tail had sacrificed her own head start. The sand shark was converging on her position, the ground bulging upward as the creature prepared to breach. Without hesitation, Jackson swung his energy rifle around and fired 3 rapid bursts at the approaching fin. The shots connected, sending shards of crystalline material flying, but the creature barely slowed. Tail had drawn her ancestral pistol and was firing precise shots at what Jackson presumed was a vulnerable point. The sand shark breached, revealing a grotesque form that seemed composed of living crystal and organic matter fused together. Its maw was a spiraling vortex of razor-sharp mineral formations. The eyes, Tail shouted. Target the sensory clusters. Jackson adjusted his aim, focusing on the pulsing nodes that dotted the creature's upper body. His shots connected, causing the monster to emit a high-pitched keening sound that made his teeth ache. The sand shark thrashed, spraying caustic fluid from glands along its side. Jackson dodged, but some of the liquid splashed across his arm, immediately burning through his protective clothing. Acid runoff, Tail warned. Don't let it touch your skin. The creature, seemingly enraged by the attack on its sensory organs, dove back beneath the surface, only to circle around for another attack. The ground rippled as it approached from a new angle. Jackson glanced at the fissure in the rock wall, too small for the creature to follow, but also too far to reach before the sand shark's next attack. He made a split-second decision. "Translator drone," he called out. The small device that had been hovering silently behind him zipped forward. "Sonic shield maximum dispersion." The drone immediately emitted a pulsating field of sound waves, a feature Jackson had specially installed for encounters with sonic-sensitive species. The waves rippled through the ground, creating a pattern of interference. The sand shark's approach faltered, its movements becoming erratic. Tail seized the opportunity, firing a concentrated burst of energy at a point where the creature's body was partly exposed. The shot penetrated, sending a web of cracks through the crystalline portions of its form. "Move!" she shouted, grabbing Jackson's uninjured arm and pulling him toward the fissure. They wedged themselves into the narrow opening, just as the wounded sand shark made a final, desperate lunge. Its massive jaws snapped shut inches from their position, unable to reach them in the confined space. For several minutes, they remained pressed against the rock, breathing heavily, as the creature continued to rage outside. Gradually, its movement slowed, and the sounds of its thrashing grew more distant until silence fell. "It's retreating," Tail said quietly. "The acid burns must be driving it back to deeper waters." Jackson nodded suddenly, very aware of the burning pain spreading up his own arm where the acid had made contact. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but Tail's sharp eyes missed nothing. "You're injured," she stated, immediately reaching for her pack. "Show me." "It's manageable," Jackson replied, the diplomat in him automatically downplaying weakness. Tail fixed him with a stern look. "Guardian Hail acid runoff from a sand shark can dissolve bone in under an hour. Show me your arm, or I will remove it myself, and I don't mean the clothing." Despite the pain, Jackson found himself almost smiling at her direct approach. He carefully peeled back the damaged sleeve, revealing angry red welts where the acid had begun to eat into his flesh. Tail's expression remained clinical as she examined the wound. From her pack, she produced a small container of iridescent paste. "This will neutralize the acid and begin tissue regeneration," she explained. "It will sting considerably." Considerably proved to be an understatement. As Tail applied the paste to his burns, Jackson had to lock his jaw to prevent a cry of pain from escaping. She worked efficiently, her touch firm but careful. "Your drone saved us," she acknowledged as she wrapped his arm in a protective covering. "Quick thinking." "As was your shot," Jackson replied. "You knew exactly where to hit it. I've encountered them before." Something dark flickered in her eyes. "My first command. We lost 3 warriors before I discovered their vulnerability." Jackson recognized the shadow of old guilt. He had seen it often enough in his own reflection. "The first losses under your command never leave you," he said quietly. Tail's hands paused in their work, her eyes meeting his with sudden intensity. "No," she agreed. "They don't." A moment of understanding passed between them, brief but undeniable. Then Tail resumed her task, securing the bandage with practiced efficiency. "We should rest here until nightfall," she decided. Sand sharks hunt by sensing vibrations through solid ground. They're less active when the temperatures drop. Jackson nodded, shifting to find a more comfortable position in the narrow confines of their shelter. "Tell me more about this unbinding stone," he suggested. "What does your great-grandmother's journal say about it?" Tail settled back against the rock wall, her expression softening slightly. She described it as a crystal that resonates at the exact frequency needed to disrupt the energy pattern of a soul bond. It was supposedly created by the first Arinthians, who discovered how to harness the planet's core energy, a safeguard against bonds formed under coercion. So it was always intended as a way out, Jackson observed. That suggests the original purpose of the soul bond wasn't meant to be irrevocable. Precisely. Tail looked at him with renewed interest. Most outsiders assume our traditions are rigid and unchangeable, but many of our oldest customs included provisions for choice and adaptation. Yet your elders now insist the bond must be honored, Jackson pointed out. Tell's expression hardened. Much has been lost or deliberately obscured over generations. Power consolidates when people believe they have no choice. They fell into silence, then, each lost in their own thoughts, as the light outside the fissure gradually dimmed. Despite the lingering pain in his arm, Jackson found himself studying Tail's profile in the fading light. The proud line of her jaw, the subtle movements of her eyes as she calculated their next move. "We should be able to cover significant ground before sunrise," she said, eventually checking her chronometer. "The path ahead follows an ancient riverbed. The terrain is easier, but we'll be more exposed. And more vulnerable to pursuit," Jackson added. "Marshal Vero won't wait long before sending scouts." "Let them come," Tail said, her hand moving to the energy pistol at her hip. "My clan has defended its sovereignty for centuries. I'd prefer we avoid confrontation if possible," Jackson said carefully. "Not out of fear, but practicality. Every delay reduces our chances of reaching the unbinding stone in time." Tell considered this, then nodded. "Wisdom in your caution, Guardian." She rose to her feet, stooping in the confined space. "Are you able to travel?" Jackson flexed his injured arm, finding the pain had subsided to a dull throb. "Your medicine works quickly. I'm ready." They emerged from the fissure into the velvet darkness of an Aurelian night. The twin moons had not yet risen, leaving only the distant stars to illuminate their path. Tile activated a small light that emitted a red glow, enough to see by, without attracting unwanted attention. As they made their way deeper into the canyon network, Jackson found himself increasingly impressed by Tail's knowledge of the terrain. She moved with confidence, choosing paths that would have been invisible to him, identifying safe drinking water from rock formations that seemed to sweat moisture in the cool night air. "You've traveled these canyons extensively," he observed, as they paused to refill their canteens. "My rite of passage," Tile explained. "All Arinthian heirs must spend a full cycle of the moons alone in the wilderness, following the ancient pathways." She traced a finger along a subtle marking etched into the canyon wall. "These guides were carved by my ancestors thousands of years ago. Only those trained to see them can follow the safe routes." "Your people were the first to settle Aurelia, weren't they?" Jackson asked. The colonial historical briefings had been notably vague on this point. "We were here before your calendar had a name for this world," Tail confirmed. "The first colony ships found us already thriving. Some of your historians prefer to believe we were simply earlier human settlers who went native. It makes conquest more palatable." "Not my historians," Jackson corrected gently. "I'm not colonial." Tail gave him a measuring look. "Yet you serve their interests." "I serve peaceful resolution," Jackson countered. "Sometimes that aligns with colonial interests. Sometimes it doesn't." "And where does your loyalty fall when those interests conflict?" It was a direct question the kind diplomats were trained to deflect. But something about their shared predicament made Jackson choose honesty instead. "I've seen too many worlds torn apart by the failure to find middle ground," he said. "My loyalty is to solutions that prevent suffering, even when they're uncomfortable for all parties involved." A diplomatic answer, Tail observed, though, without the dismissive tone he might have expected. "But a truthful one," Jackson insisted. "I believe your vision of partnership between your people and the colony is the only sustainable path forward. That's why I'm helping you find this stone, even though it means Marshal Vero will likely have me removed from my position. or worse. Tal was silent for a long moment, studying him in the dim red light. Then we share at least one common goal, she finally said. Come. We need to reach the lightning fields by tomorrow's dusk. They traveled through the night, speaking little but developing a rhythm to their movement that required minimal communication. Jackson found himself adapting to Tale's pace naturally, as if some part of him could anticipate her decisions. Once, when a rock shelf gave way beneath his feet, her hand shot out to steady him before he had even begun to fall. Neither of them mentioned these moments of unexpected synchronization. By the time the first sun began to rise, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, they had covered impressive ground. Tile led them to a shallow cave where they could rest during the hottest part of the day. Sleep, she instructed, as they arranged their packs to create makeshift pillows. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours, Jackson replied, settling into a position that kept his injured arm elevated. But when he opened his eyes again, the quality of light filtering into the cave told him far more time had passed. He sat up quickly, finding Tale sitting at the cave entrance, her profile silhouetted against the afternoon light. You didn't wake me, he said, unable to keep a note of accusation from his voice. You needed the healing rest more than I needed sleep, she replied without turning. The acid burn is serious, Guardian. Your body requires time to repair. Jackson moved to join her at the entrance, noting with concern the dark circles under her eyes. And you require rest to maintain focus. Next time, wake me as agreed. A smile ghosted across her features. You presume to give me orders, Guardian. I presume to remind you that equal partnership means shared burdens, Jackson responded, holding her gaze steadily. Something shifted in Tale's expression. Respect, perhaps, or reassessment. Fair point, she conceded. I will rest now if you're ready to take watch. As Tale slept, Jackson kept vigilant guard at the cave entrance. He used the time to study the map she had shared, memorizing the route ahead. The lightning field she had mentioned appeared to be a vast expanse, where electrical storms were perpetually active, a natural barrier that had kept much of southern Aurelia unexplored by colonial forces. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint but distinctive sound of engines in the distance. Setting aside the map, he used his translator drone's enhanced visual capabilities to scan the horizon. 3 hover vehicles were moving through the canyon network, following their trail with methodical precision. Jackson returned to Tale's side, gently touching her shoulder. She woke instantly, fully alert. Pursuit, he said simply. 3 craft approximately 5 kilometers back. Colonial design. Tale rose and gathered her gear with practiced efficiency. Vero's scouts. They're tracking us faster than I anticipated. She checked the power level on her energy pistol. We need to reach the lightning fields before they catch up. Once inside, their vehicles will be useless. They set out, immediately abandoning stealth in favor of speed. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they descended deeper into the canyon system. In places, the walls closed in so tightly they had to turn sideways to pass through their packs, scraping against ancient stone. The entrance to the fields is just ahead, Tale said as they emerged from a particularly narrow passage. Beyond that ridge. Her words cut off as the distinctive whine of a hover engine echoed much closer than before. One of the pursuit craft had split from the others, taking a different route to cut them off. They know these canyons better than I expected, Tale said grimly, drawing her weapon. We'll have to fight. Jackson surveyed their position. They stood at a junction where 3 canyons converged into a small clearing, defensible, but also a perfect spot for an ambush. Not here, he decided. It's what they want. Look. He pointed to a narrow ledge that ran along one of the canyon walls leading upward. If we can reach higher ground before they arrive, we control the engagement. Tale followed his gaze and nodded. Good strategy. You go first, your longer reach will be an advantage on the climb. They scrambled up the rocky face, finding handholds in the ancient stone. The ledge was barely wide enough for a single person, forcing them to press their backs against the canyon wall as they inched along. Below, the sound of the hover engine grew louder. Just as they reached a defensible outcropping, the first pursuit craft rounded the corner into the clearing. Two figures in colonial security uniforms leapt out, weapons ready. "Hail," one of them called up. "By authority of Marshal Vero, you and the Erinthian princess are ordered to return to the colony immediately." "Under what charges?" Jackson called back, buying time, as Tal positioned herself behind a boulder. "Interference with diplomatic negotiations and theft of cultural artifacts," the security officer replied. "Surrender now, and you'll be treated fairly." Jackson exchanged a glance with Tal, who shook her head slightly. Neither of them believed Vero's sense of fair treatment aligned with their own. "I'm afraid we must decline," Jackson responded. "Our mission is sanctioned by Erinthian leadership and protected under interplanetary law." It was a bluff, of course, but delivered with the confidence of a career diplomat. The security officers conferred briefly. Then the second one spoke. "We have orders to bring you in by any means necessary. This is your final warning." Such hostility hardly seems conducive to the peaceful alliance both our peoples desire," Jackson replied deliberately, using formal diplomatic language. "Perhaps we could discuss this matter like civilized—" His words were cut off as one of the officers fired a warning shot that struck the rock face inches from his position. "Negotiations appear to have broken down," Tal murmured dryly. In a fluid motion, she leaned out from her cover and fired two precise shots from her energy pistol. The first disabled the hovercraft's engine with a shower of sparks. The second struck the ground between the officers, sending them diving for cover. "Run," she urged Jackson. "The lightning fields are just beyond that ridgeline." They abandoned their elevated position, sliding down a scree slope on the opposite side of the canyon. Behind them, shouts and the sound of pursuit grew more distant as they wove through increasingly chaotic rock formations. The landscape changed dramatically as they approached the fields. The orderly canyon walls gave way to jagged spires of black, glass-like material. The air grew charged with static electricity, causing the fine hairs on Jackson's arms to stand on end. And then suddenly, they were there, standing at the edge of a vast plain, where reality itself seemed distorted. The ground was composed of some dark, reflective material that mirrored the turbulent sky above. Arcs of energy, in vivid purple and blue, danced between crystal formations that thrust upward like the fingers of buried giants. "The lightning fields," Tal said, a note of reverence in her voice. "Few outsiders have ever seen this place." "I can understand why," Jackson replied, watching as a bolt of energy struck one of the crystal spires, sending a web of light coursing through its structure. "How do we cross safely?" Tal removed a small device from her pack, a cylinder of metal and crystal that resembled a dowsing rod from ancient Earth. "This will guide us through the safe pathways. The electrical patterns appear random, but actually follow subtle cycles. My ancestors mapped them centuries ago." She handed him a pair of insulated boots. "Put these on, and stay close to me, exactly 3 steps behind at all times. The rod creates a disruption field that's precisely calibrated for that distance." Jackson changed his footwear quickly, aware that their pursuers couldn't be far behind. "What happens to them if they try to follow without protection?" Tal glanced back at the ridge they had crossed. "The fields would turn them to ash in seconds." With that sobering thought, they began their crossing. Tal moved with deliberate steps, the rod in her hand, glowing with increasing intensity as they ventured deeper into the fields. Jackson focused on maintaining the exact distance she had specified, counting his steps mentally. Around them, the air crackled with power. Occasionally, a bolt of energy would strike nearby, causing the ground to vibrate beneath their feet. Each time, Tal would pause, consulting the rod, before adjusting their course slightly. They had made it perhaps halfway across, when a deafening crack split the air behind them. Jackson risked a glance back to see a colonial pursuit craft attempting to enter the fields. For a moment, it hovered at the boundary, its shields glowing as they struggled to repel the electrical energy. Then, a massive bolt struck the craft directly. There was a brilliant flash, and when Jackson's vision cleared, only scattered debris remained. "They should have waited for reinforcements," Tell said, her voice tight. "Marshal Vero pushes his people too hard." "Were there any survivors?" Jackson asked, straining to see through the electrical haze. "Unlikely," Tile replied grimly. "The fields show no mercy to the unprepared." She checked the rod again. "We need to keep moving. The pattern is shifting." They continued their careful progress, each step calculated. The storm around them intensified as they approached the center of the fields, with bolts of energy striking so frequently that the air was filled with a continuous rumble of thunder. There, Tail pointed ahead, where a massive formation of crystal spires rose from the dark plain. Unlike the other formations, these crystals refracted light in a rainbow spectrum, creating a kaleidoscope effect that was both beautiful and disorienting. The rainbow spires. The temple entrance should be at their base. As they drew closer, Jackson could make out structures that were clearly artificial, ancient columns, and archways partially buried in the crystalline ground. The remains of a temple, or perhaps an entire city, preserved beneath the surface of the lightning fields. They reached the relative safety of the spires as the electrical storm reached a crescendo around them. Tail deactivated the guiding rod as they stepped onto the temple grounds, where the air was noticeably calmer. "The ancients built this place at the eye of the perpetual storm," she explained, running her hand along a column inscribed with glyphs, unlike any Jackson had seen before. "They believed it was where the planet's consciousness was most accessible." Jackson examined the half-buried structures with professional interest. "These aren't Arinthian glyphs," he observed. "No," Tile agreed. "They're older, much older. My people were not the first to call Aurelia home." She led him deeper into the ruins, where a massive doorway stood partially obscured by fallen debris. Together, they cleared enough of the rubble to squeeze through into the darkness beyond. Tile produced a light source that cast a soft blue glow around them, revealing a vast chamber, whose walls were covered in intricate patterns of glyphs and geometric designs. At the center of the room stood a pedestal of black stone, its surface inlaid with crystals that glinted in the light. "The Oracle Chamber." Tale breathed, her voice hushed with reverence. "My great-grandmother's journal described this place, but I never thought I'd stand within it." Jackson approached the walls, studying the patterns of glyphs. His translator drone hovered nearby, attempting to process the unfamiliar symbols. "Many of these patterns resemble mathematical equations," he observed. "Energy flow diagrams, perhaps?" Tale nodded, looking impressed despite herself. "The ancients understood the fundamental nature of energy in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. These diagrams show how they harnessed the planet's core energy for various purposes." She pointed to a particular sequence, including the creation of soul rounds. Jackson followed the sequence with his eyes, tracing the flow of symbols across the wall. "And this section," he said, indicating where the pattern diverged. "Would that represent the unbinding stone?" "Yes," Tale confirmed, genuine surprise in her voice. "You have a good eye for patterns, Guardian." They continued around the chamber, piecing together the story told in the ancient glyphs. The translator drone gradually built a partial lexicon, allowing them to decipher fragments of the text. "Listen to this," Jackson said after nearly an hour of study. "The binding of souls is sacred when chosen freely by equals. Force creates false bonds that poison both spirits." Tale looked up from her own examination of the opposite wall. "And here, when hearts are joined in truth, neither seeks to command the other's will. This is the foundation of lasting union." They exchanged a look across the chamber, the implications settling between them. The soul-binding ritual had never been intended as a means of control or political alliance. It was meant to formalize a partnership between equals who had already chosen each other. "The elders have twisted the original purpose," Tael said quietly, anger and sadness mingling in her voice. Generation by generation, the ritual became a tool for political alliances and consolidation of power. "And the unbinding stone was created as a safeguard," Jackson added, to protect those forced into unwanted bonds. They continued their exploration, moving deeper into the temple complex. In one chamber, they found diagrams showing the creation process for soul rounds, how they were infused with the essence of the Creator through meditation and focused intent. In another, they discovered murals depicting the ritual in its original form, two individuals standing as equals, each creating a soul round that they would exchange simultaneously, a mutual choice, rather than a proposal and response. "This changes everything," Tyel said as they studied the ancient artwork. "If my people knew the truth." Her words were cut off as the floor beneath them suddenly illuminated lines of energy running through previously invisible channels in the stone. The entire chamber came alive with light, pulsing in patterns that matched the glyphs on the walls. "What's happening?" Jackson asked instinctively, moving closer to Tyel. "The temple's defense matrix," she replied, her hand moving to her weapon. "It's awakening." The light intensified, forming a three-dimensional lattice that filled the chamber from floor to ceiling. It moved like a liquid flowing around them, through them, as if testing their composition. "Don't move," Tyel instructed. "It's scanning us." Jackson remained perfectly still as the light passed through his body. It didn't hurt, but he could feel it, a tingling sensation that seemed to resonate with something deep within him. And then abruptly, the light contracted, forming a barrier that separated him from Tyel. She was trapped in a cage of living light on one side of the chamber, while he was confined to the other. "Are you all right?" he called across to her. Tyel nodded, though her expression was tense. "The Matrix has identified us as separate entities. It's a defense mechanism to prevent unauthorized access to the temple's core." "How do we deactivate it?" Tyel examined the patterns of light surrounding her. "These energies respond to harmonic frequencies. If we can synchronize our actions." She pointed to a control panel embedded in the wall on Jackson's side. "That interface might allow us to communicate with the Matrix. Can you access it?" Jackson approached the panel cautiously. It consisted of crystal touchpoints, arranged in a complex pattern that matched some of the glyphs they had seen earlier. "My drone might be able to interface with it," he suggested, directing the small device toward the panel. The drone attempted to connect with the ancient technology, its processing lights flickering rapidly as it worked through various protocols. After several tense minutes, it produced a series of tones that caused the light barrier to flicker. "It's working," Tyel observed. "But not completely. The Matrix requires a direct biological connection. It was designed to respond to Aurelian life forms." "What about the soul round?" Jackson suggested. "It contains your essence, and it responded to my touch. Could it serve as a bridge?" Tyel considered this, then carefully removed the crystal vial from her belt. The soul round inside still pulsed with inner light, seeming to brighten as she held it toward the barrier. "I'll try to use it to calm the Matrix," she said. "While I do that, have your drone continue attempting to hack the interface. The combined approach might work." As Tyel began a series of ritualistic movements with the soul round chanting softly in an ancient dialect, Jackson directed his drone to continue its attempts to communicate with the Matrix. The light barriers pulsed in rhythm with Tyel's chanting, gradually shifting from a harsh white to a softer blue. Jackson found himself instinctively synchronizing his breathing with Tyel's chant, his hands moving over the control panel in patterns that matched her movements. It wasn't a conscious decision. Something deeper was guiding him, perhaps the same connection that had allowed him to catch the soul round in the first place. Gradually, the barriers began to thin, becoming more permeable. Tyel's voice grew stronger, more confident as she saw their strategy working. The soul round in her hands glowed brighter, its energy seeming to harmonize with the temple's matrix. With a final surge of light, the barriers dissolved entirely, leaving them standing in a chamber now illuminated by a gentle, ambient glow. "We did it," Tyel said, her voice filled with quiet amazement. "The Matrix has accepted us." As if in response to her words, a hidden doorway slid open in the far wall, revealing a smaller chamber beyond. At its center stood a pedestal of pure crystal, and upon it rested a stone, unlike any Jackson had seen before, a perfectly smooth oval of material that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states, its surface rippling with colors that had no names in any human language. The Unbinding Stone. Tell whispered, approaching the pedestal with reverence. It's real. Before either of them could touch it, a new set of glyphs illuminated around the pedestal, forming a circle of light. Tell translated aloud. The severing of bonds must mirror their creation with intent and choice, shared equally by both. Only when two hands touch the stone together with mutual desire for release will the binding energies disperse. Jackson moved to stand beside her at the pedestal. It requires both of us to agree, he observed. Another safeguard against coercion. Tal looked at him, those color-shifting eyes searching his face. Are you willing to touch it with me to end the bond that was accidentally created? Before Jackson could respond, a commotion echoed from the outer chambers. Voices, footsteps, the distinctive sound of colonial energy weapons being charged. Marshal Vero, Jackson said grimly. He must have brought reinforcements through the lightning fields. How? Tal demanded. No colonial vessel could navigate the storm safely. Unless they captured one of your people, Jackson suggested. Someone with knowledge of the safe pathways. Tal's expression hardened. We need to secure the stone and leave immediately. Wait, Jackson said, catching her arm gently. We don't yet know how to properly use it. If we take it without understanding... There's no time, Tal hissed, glancing toward the doorway as the sounds of approach grew louder. Jackson made a swift decision. Take it then, I'll delay them. Tal stared at him in surprise. You would face Vero alone. Why? Because I believe in your vision for your people, Jackson replied simply. And because I caused this problem in the first place. Go find a way out through the back chambers. I'll keep them occupied here. For a moment Tal seemed torn. Then, with decisive movement, she reached for the unbinding stone. As her fingers neared its surface, the stone began to pulse rapidly, its colors shifting with increasing speed. Something's wrong, she said, pulling back. It's reacting to my approach. They both studied the glyphs surrounding the pedestal more carefully, Jackson's translator drone, offering additional insight. The stone responds only to those who seek truth, not escape, Jackson read aloud. Face what is before changing what might be. The sounds of Marshal Vero's party grew closer. They were in the oracle chamber, now only one room away. We're out of time, Tal said urgently. What does it mean, face what is... Jackson looked at the soul round still clutched in Tal's hand, then at the unbinding stone on the pedestal. A realization dawned. I think we need to understand the true nature of the bond before we can break it, he said. The temple has been showing us that the ritual was meant for equals who choose each other. But our bond was formed by accident, by misunderstanding. So what do we do? Tal demanded. Jackson held out his hand. Give me the soul round. With only a moment's hesitation, Tal placed the crystal vial in his palm. Jackson carefully opened it, extracting the glowing crystal round. What I did at the ceremony was impulsive and uninformed, he said, meeting Tal's gaze steadily. I didn't understand the consequences of my words or your response. But now, having learned the truth of the ritual's purpose, he took a deep breath. I choose to acknowledge that a true bond can only exist between equals who freely choose each other. With deliberate movement, he pressed the soul round against his forearm, where the acid burn was still healing. The crystal seemed to melt into his skin, causing a brief flash of pain as it merged with his blood. What are you doing? Tal gasped. Demonstrating sincerity, Jackson replied through gritted teeth. The original ritual required both participants to invest their essence. I'm completing my part. The soul round pulsed beneath his skin, creating a network of glowing lines that traced his veins. Then, just as Marshal Vero and his security team burst into the chamber, Jackson extended his arm toward Tal. This is your choice, he told her, his voice steady despite the pain. Equal partners decide together. Marshal Vero was a tall, imposing figure, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore the formal uniform of the colonial authority, adorned with medals that spoke of a distinguished career built on uncompromising efficiency. "Step away from the artifacts," Vero ordered his voice, carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Both of you are under arrest for theft of cultural heritage and violation of diplomatic protocols." Tail ignored him completely, her focus entirely on Jackson and the glowing soul round embedded in his arm. With deliberate movement, she drew her ancestral energy pistol, causing Vero's security team to raise their weapons in response. "Hold your fire," Vero commanded sharply. "The artifacts must not be damaged." Tail lowered her pistol, not to holster it, but to place her free hand over Jackson's wound. The glow intensified where their skin met, creating a circuit of energy between them. "I, Tail of the Arinthian clan, recognize you as an equal partner," she declared, loud enough for all to hear. Not by accident or coercion, but by choice based on witnessed character. She began to whisper in the ancient Arinthian tongue, words that Jackson somehow understood, despite never having learned the language. "By shared blood and shared purpose, I acknowledge this bond reformed in truth." The soul round responded, detaching from Jackson's flesh and hovering between their joined hands, pulsing with renewed energy. "This is absurd," Vero interrupted, stepping forward. "Princess Tail, your clan awaits your return to ratify the trade agreement as agreed with your elders. This man has manipulated you into—" "Silence," Tael commanded, without looking at him. "You speak of agreements made without my consent, Marshal. Those days are ended." She guided Jackson's hand, still entwined with hers, toward the unbinding stone. As they approached the pedestal together, the stone began to glow in harmony with the soul round. "The original must be dissolved before the true can form," Tael said again, in words that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her own understanding. "Will you join me in this, Guardian Jackson Hale?" "I will," Jackson replied the formal words, feeling right on his tongue. Together, they placed their joined hands, the soul round, cradled between them, onto the unbinding stone. There was a moment of perfect stillness, and then a pulse of energy that rippled outward through the chamber, causing the colonial security team to stumble back in alarm. The soul round dissolved into particles of light that swirled around Jackson and Tail, before converging again into a new form, still a crystal projectile, but now with a double helix of energy at its core, two distinct signatures intertwined. "Enough of this primitive superstition," Vero snapped, regaining his composure. "Security team, take them into custody, carefully." As the security officers advanced, the temple's defense matrix suddenly reactivated, not as barriers this time, but as a wave of energy that flowed outward from the pedestal, where Jackson and Tail still stood, their hands joined. The colonial forces were pushed backward, their weapons deactivated by the surge of energy. Vero alone managed to stand his ground, his face contorted with rage. "This alliance will happen on my terms," he insisted. "The resources of this planet belong to the colony by right of development. Your clan will submit, Princess, as all primitives eventually do to progress." Tail finally turned to face him fully, the newly forged soul round, now secure in her pistol. "You mistake technology for civilization, Marshal. And you mistake my people's patience for weakness." With Jackson at her side, she advanced toward Vero, the temple's energies swirling around them, like a protective cloak. "The alliance will proceed, but as a partnership of equals. My clan will share access to the trade routes in exchange for mining technology, not control." "The Colony Council will never agree," Vero sneered. "They answer to me." "Do they?" Jackson asked mildly. "Or do they answer to the Central Colonial Authority, who might be very interested to learn how one of their marshals has been conducting unauthorized military operations against a sovereign indigenous population?" Vero's expression flickered a momentary crack in his confident facade. "You have no proof of any misconduct." "But we have witnesses," Jackson countered, nodding toward the security team, who had begun to look increasingly uncomfortable. "And we have this." He held up his translator drone. "It records everything, Marshal. Standard diplomatic protocol. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before one of Vero's officers, a young woman with obvious discomfort written across her features, lowered her weapon. "Marshal, I cannot participate in actions against colonial law," she stated firmly. "The princess has diplomatic immunity, and Mr. Hale is acting within his authority as security liaison." One by one, the other officers followed her lead, stepping back from their aggressive posture. Vero found himself isolated, his authority crumbling in real time. "This isn't over," he hissed, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "On the contrary," Tal replied calmly, "it is very much over. Your approach has failed, Marshal. It is time for a new way forward." With the colonial forces effectively neutralized by their own internal fracturing, Jackson and Tal were able to leave the temple complex unhindered. They carried with them not only the newly forged soul round, but also recorded evidence of the original ritual's true purpose, evidence that would reshape Arinthian society's understanding of their most sacred tradition. The journey back through the lightning fields was undertaken in a contemplative silence, each of them processing the profound shift in their circumstances. It was only when they reached the relative safety of the canyon network that Tal finally spoke of what had transpired. "You surprised me," she admitted, as they made camp for the night. "Few would bleed for a stranger." "Are we still strangers?" Jackson asked quietly. Tal considered this, her gaze resting on the campfire between them. "No," she finally concluded. "Not strangers. But what we are instead remains to be defined." "Partners in a crisis at minimum," Jackson offered. "Allied in purpose if nothing else." A small smile touched Tal's lips. "A diplomat's careful phrasing. Would you prefer bluntness?" "I would prefer honesty," she replied. "What do you truly want, Jackson Hale, now that our accidental bond has been reformed by choice?" It was the first time she had used his name without his title, and the significance wasn't lost on him. Jackson took a moment to consider his answer, knowing that diplomacy would not serve here. "I want to see your vision of equal partnership between your people and the colony realized," he said finally. "I believe it's not only possible but necessary for both societies to thrive." And he hesitated, then committed to full honesty. "I would like to know who Tal of the Arinthian clan is beyond her title and responsibilities. The person I've glimpsed in moments of crisis has intrigued me." Tal studied him across the firelight, her expression thoughtful. Bold words from a man who has built a career on emotional distance. "Perhaps it's time for new approaches," Jackson replied simply. "Perhaps," Tal agreed, a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. "When we return, there will be consequences to face. The elders will not easily accept changes to traditions they have controlled for generations. And the Colonial Council will resist equal terms until they have no choice but to accept them," Jackson added. "We're challenging entrenched power on both sides." "Good," Tal said with sudden fierceness. "Power should never remain unchallenged. That is how it corrupts." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a different quality of silence now, comfortable, shared, occasionally punctuated by exchanged glances that carried more meaning than words could have conveyed. In the days that followed, as they made their way back to the colony, they spoke more freely of their respective pasts. Jackson told Tal of the 17 worlds he had visited, of diplomatic missions that succeeded, and those that failed, of the personal connections he had systematically avoided forming. In turn, Tal shared stories of her upbringing as the heir to the Arinthian leadership, of the weight of ancient traditions placed on her shoulders, from childhood of her private doubts about rituals whose original meanings had been lost to time. By the time they crested the final ridge and saw the colony and Arinthian encampment spread out below them, they had formed a bond far more meaningful than any mystical connection, a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. "They've seen us," Tal observed, noting the sudden activity in both camps. "Word will spread quickly." "Are you ready?" Jackson asked. Tal straightened her spine, resuming the regal posture that befitted her position. But when she looked at him, Her eyes held a warmth that belonged to the woman, not the princess. "With you beside me as an equal voice, yes." Their return caused the sensation they had anticipated. Colonial officials and Arinthian elders alike rushed to meet them as they walked side by side into the central gathering place, where the two communities converged. Marshal Vero had apparently fled, rather than face the consequences of his actions. But his second-in-command, the young officer, who had been the first to lower her weapon in the temple, had assumed temporary authority and was already working to stabilize relations. The Arinthian elders were less easily managed. They surrounded Tale, demanding explanations for her disappearance and the obvious changes in the soul round now displayed at her belt. "You have abandoned our most sacred tradition," accused one elderly man, his face lined with disapproval. "The bond must be completed as our laws demand, or you forfeit your right to lead." "I have not abandoned tradition," Tell replied, her voice carrying across the gathering. "I have reclaimed its original meaning." She gestured for Jackson to join her at the center of the circle, and together they presented the evidence they had discovered in the temple, the original form of the ritual, the true purpose of the soul bond as a union of equals who choose each other freely. For generations, the elders have used this ritual as a tool of political alliance and control, Tyle declared. But that was never its purpose. The soul bond was meant to celebrate partnerships already formed through mutual respect and choice. Murmurs spread through both the Arinthian clan and the colonial representatives as the implications became clear. The colonial administrator stepped forward. "Are you saying that this mystical bond is now legitimately formed between you and Guardian Hale?" he asked, struggling to keep skepticism from his tone. "What I am saying," Tale clarified, "is that Jackson Hale and I have chosen to form an alliance as equals, symbolized by the reformed soul round. This alliance extends to our peoples as well." She turned to address both communities together. "The Arinthian clan will grant access to the southern trade routes in exchange for mining technology that respects our sacred lands. We will establish a council with equal representation to oversee all joint ventures. And we will do so without the protection that Marshal Vero so generously offered at the price of our sovereignty." The negotiations that followed were intense, but productive. Without Vero's influence, the colonial council proved more reasonable than expected. The evidence against the marshal was too substantial to ignore, and formal charges were filed with the central colonial authority. On the Arinthian side, the revelation of the ritual's true origins caused a profound shift in the clan's power structure. Younger members who had long chafed under traditions they found restrictive rallied behind Tale's vision of reclaiming ancient wisdom while evolving their application for modern times. By the time the Twin Moons completed their next cycle, a new agreement had been formalized between the colony and the Arinthian clan, one founded on principles of mutual benefit rather than dominance. To celebrate the historic alliance, a festival was held in the colony's central plaza. Arinthian caravans and colonial structures stood side by side, adorned with banners of both cultures. Music from both traditions intermingled, creating harmonies that were strange, but not unpleasant to either ear. At the height of the celebration, as the Twin Moons reached their zenith, Jackson and Tale stood together beneath an arch decorated with luminous glyphs that told the story of their journey. "The elders still watch me closely," Tale observed, nodding subtly toward a group of older Arinthians conferring in a corner of the plaza. "They fear that our reformed ritual will spread to others who wish to choose their own partners." "And will it?" Jackson asked. A smile blossomed across Tale's face, not the measured expression of a princess, but the genuine joy of a woman who had found unexpected freedom. "It already has," she replied. 3 couples approached me yesterday asking to learn the original form of the ritual. Young people who love each other, but whose families had arranged different matches for a political advantage." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that tradition honored properly is not rigid law but living wisdom. That the ancestors who created these rituals wanted their descendants to be happy and free." Her expression softened. And then I taught them the words we discovered in the temple. Jackson found himself smiling in response. You will transform your society. We will transform both our societies, Tell corrected gently. Already colonial children play with Arinthian youth at the edge of the camp. Already your scientists and our mystics compare notes on the properties of crystal energy. These changes cannot be undone. As they spoke, the festival reached its ceremonial apex. Silence fell across the gathering as all eyes turned to where they stood. It was time for the public acknowledgement of the new alliance. With deliberate movements, Tell removed the soul round from her pistol and held it up for all to see. The crystal glowed with inner light, the double helix at its core pulsing with combined energies. Then, with a fluid motion that reminded Jackson of their first meeting, she tossed it toward him. Without hesitation, he caught it, feeling once again that strange resonance as the crystal touched his palm. But this time, there was no surprise, no confusion, only the certainty of a choice made with full awareness. So that's how you say yes, he whispered, echoing his own words from that fateful night. But now, with a smile that reached his eyes. The crowd erupted in cheers and celebration as Jackson returned the soul round to Tell, with a formal bow that managed to be both respectful of tradition and subtly affectionate. As the twin suns began to rise on a new day, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Jackson and Tell stood together at the edge of the plaza, their silhouettes framed by the intermingled banners of the Arinthian clan and the colony. What comes next for the diplomat and the princess? Jackson asked quietly. Tell's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. That, she replied, is a story we write together. Above them, the twin moons faded as the suns ascended fully into the sky. Not an ending, but a transition into a new phase of light and possibility.